Hey everyone, it's Blake. Welcome in to episode number 12 of our WWF Invasion 2001 save in TEW9. This is SmackDown for May 29th, 2001. The fallout continues from Judgment Day. We had a very chaotic episode of Raw, as you guys know, and now we're going to see what happens on this must-see edition of SmackDown as I hyped it up, because there will be a couple of pretty significant developments on this particular show. Appreciate all your great feedback, guys. I know it was a lot of fun to get back into actually recording an episode here, actually playing the game regularly again, as I mentioned in the previous episode. So if you're someone who hasn't caught up yet, plenty of time to go back do that. You can go back through this entire series. Again, only 10 or so episodes to catch up on if you want to jump right into this one here as we get back into it. So let's start with SmackDown, and let's talk about what we see as we come on the air for this edition of SmackDown. And it is a bit of a tense scene here as we see Vince McMahon and Steve Austin sitting there sort of staring into space. They're looking ahead, both of them clearly with a lot on their mind coming out of what happened at the end of Raw. This gets an 89 for the segment. And it is Austin and Vince, again, talking about trust. That is something brought up here as Vince is just saying, Steve, are we going to talk about this or not? And you can tell Austin is still pissed off. Remember, Austin did not show up to start Raw, didn't come back until the end of Raw when he sort of took things into his own hands and said, we're going to go fight Booker T and DDP in the parking lot once those guys arrived. They went out and brawled with them, but unfortunately left themselves open to the attack by The Undertaker and Kane, who made their way back into the arena. Chaos everywhere to end Raw, and it was The Undertaker and Kane standing tall over Austin and Angle after Booker T and DDP had retreated. So Vince just says, Steve, we've got to focus on the facts here, not on emotion. And Vince says, I'm as guilty as anyone when it comes to focusing on emotion, because when I got that phone call after everything that happened on Raw, Booker T, DDP, The Undertaker, Kane, after I got that phone call about the person who was in charge of letting this security breach happen over the past week or so, when I got that phone call and found out the name, Steve, I was emotional. I was angry. But I also know that I have declared war on WCW. And the way to win a war, Steve, is not through emotions. It's through facts and through a plan. And Vince just says, Steve, I've got a plan tonight on how we're going to handle this person who was in charge of this big security breach and the person who has allowed all of this to happen between us. And that's when Austin just stops him and says, Vince, you're going to tell me who that person was, but I want to know one thing. You can talk about anything you want to talk about. You want to know why I wasn't here to start Raw, why I didn't come back until those two bastards, Booker T and DDP, were in the parking lot because of what you did at Judgment Day. You had the Big Show come out and interfere in my match against The Undertaker. Is it because you didn't think I could beat The Undertaker, Vince? And you can tell Austin's starting to get a little more, he's getting a little more furious here. You didn't think I could beat The Undertaker. We had Kurt Angle stay in the back. That was part of the plan, but you had the Big Show come out and take out The Undertaker. Be honest with me, Vince. Did you think I couldn't beat him? And Vince just kind of sitting there, of course not, Steve. Of course I thought you would beat The Undertaker. You're the WWF champion. You're one half of the tag team champions. And that's when Austin just says, you want to talk about trust. I got every reason not to trust you, but I do. And so, if we're going to do this, we better be on the same page. And Vince just says, I agree, Steve. I agree. And I'm going to give you something right now to guarantee that we will be on the same page as we enter into the war with WCW. Because, Steve, the war is already here. And so, Vince and Austin going back and forth here. A bit of a dramatic opening segment, but that's kind of the point. These two, a little bit tense, as we know, with this relationship. And Vince says he has something for Austin to make sure they stay on the same page here as they enter the war with WCW. So, 89 for this segment. There will be more to come, as you can expect. But we also get the announcement here from JR that Vince McMahon has announced that the reward for the Big Show, coming out of what happened on Raw, where we did see the Big Show kind of take it to Chris Jericho and take out Jericho in that match, which was clearly the plan, Vince said he was going to have the Big Show with a reward on SmackDown. Well, the reward is that he's going to face Kane for the Intercontinental Championship tonight in our main event. So the Big Show versus Kane, the Intercontinental title on the line. And as it's noted on commentary, folks, of course, JR says, you're not going to believe this. Surprise, surprise. Vince McMahon has announced that The Undertaker has been banned from the building. So again, this was kind of the dramatic lead-in with Austin and Vince. Now it's revealed that The Undertaker has been banned from the building again. And so clearly, kind of the way JR and Taz are pushing this is though Vince feels much more confident in having people banned from the building because he's figured out who was in charge of this big breach of security that has seemingly cost them at every turn here over the past week or so. So Vince has The Undertaker banned from the building. Kane's in all alone, and he's got to defend his title against the Big Show. 71 for this one. All right, now to tag team action. Pretty good tag team match here. 73 for this one, as it's Edge and Christian defeating Too Cool in 709 as Christian pins Scotty 2 Hotty using the underhanded tactic. So we had a little bit, back and forth between these two. We've had it before in six-man tag match action and all that, but we've had kind of the back and forth here. Edge and Christian get the win. We know that Christian is already advanced in the King of the Ring. Edge is going to face Rikishi, so that's kind of the story here is that you have Edge and Christian teaming up against two members of Too Cool here in Grandmaster Sexay and Scotty 2 Hotty, but it's Edge and Christian getting the win using some cheating tactics here. So that's kind of your story. Rikishi, on the outside, Edge and Christian run off. That's sort of the story we're telling ahead of, potential King of the Ring showdowns involving these others. So Christian is advanced. Edge, we know, will be in action coming up here soon. I think that's actually slated for Raw, where he's going to take on Raven and that kind of stuff here as we get into it. So more to come from Edge and Christian, though, on this particular show. All right, now we go backstage, and this is an interesting segment. 92 for this one, as it is Eric Bischoff arriving. Remember, we had the discussion on Raw, Vince saying that Bischoff needed to be here because they needed to go through the battle plan for WCW. And so Eric Bischoff arrives, and you can tell there's new security guards. Remember, we've had all these security issues, and so there are new security guards walking in with Eric Bischoff. And so as soon as he walks in, Kurt Angle also enters the room. But before anything else happens here, it's worth noting that Vince McMahon gets up, Steve Austin gets up, and Austin goes over and gets right in Eric Bischoff's face. And Angle's just kind of looking at it and saying, Steve, hold on a second. What? Just calm down. What are you doing? And Austin just says, Kurt, I have something to say to Eric Bischoff. And Austin just says, Eric, I'm sorry. That's all Austin says. He just says, I'm sorry to Eric Bischoff. And so Angle just says, Steve, that's very nice. And Kurt always in a good move here, even though coming off of getting his ass beat on Raw, Angle's in a good mood here. And he's just saying, Steve, you're growing as a person. That means we're growing as tag team champions. And Austin saying he's sorry to Bischoff, and Vince just says, Steve, that's thank you for doing that, but that's enough. We have business to tend to here tonight. And that's when Angle just says, Vince, speaking of, where is Mr. Regal? Where is he at? I need to talk to him about a few things. And Vince just says, Kurt, I gave Commissioner Regal the night off because I think he needs it, because he needs to come back with a new attitude. He has let us down time and time again over the past couple weeks, and I need William Regal coming back on Raw on Monday with his own plan to make sure that we get ahead of everything that's going on right now with the battle with WCW, with the battle with The Undertaker, Kane, Chris Jericho, all of these guys. I need him back, and I need him to have a plan. And Vince says, speaking of that plan, Kurt, why don't you and Eric actually have a little conversation here? Steve and I are finishing up some business to handle as we look ahead. And Vince says, why don't you and Eric talk about a few things, and perhaps you can reveal your plans, Kurt, to Eric for how you think we should handle WCW. So, Kurt's excited about this. Vince is giving him a job. He's telling him to discuss the battle plans with Eric Bischoff. And so, Vince just says, Eric, we'll talk here in just a minute. But Steve and I have a couple other things to discuss. So, Kurt Angle walks off. He's putting his arm around Eric Bischoff. He's excited, ready to talk about the battle plans for WCW 92 for this one. All right, now we get to an announcement from JR and Taz again. And they reveal, well, folks, here we go yet again. We have just been informed by the WWF medical team that Chris Jericho has not been cleared yet for tonight's King of the Ring match against Rhyno, which we know Rhyno came out, gored Jericho after the match against Big Show on Raw. And so Jericho, status in jeopardy. He took the gore, he took the choke slam through the table from Big Show and all of that. So Jericho, status in doubt for this match against Rhyno. Will it happen? We don't know yet. JR says we're waiting to find out. We're not yet sure if we're going to be able to give you Chris Jericho versus Rhyno with the winner going on to the King of the Ring quarterfinals. So 48 here for the segment. I don't even know. We probably could have did this much better, but I think it's probably just because we had JR and Taz in here and probably a very basic role. So I'm guessing that's why this was a little bit lower. We could have really just focused on Jericho, but sometimes I like to throw JR and Taz in there just for the fun of it. So, all right. Now we get to this one, and once again, we're getting the penalties here from Eddie Guerrero. Still the personal issues, so we know we've been getting that from Eddie. But speaking of King of the Ring, by the way, we'll have your updated bracket by the end of this show, so you'll know what the updated King of the Ring bracket looks like afterwards. But 53 here for the segment, and it's Michael Cole with Eddie Guerrero. And Cole just asks, Eddie, for starters, I want to get your thoughts on WCW. We've been asking talent about what they think about what is happening right now with WCW. Booker T's been here. DDP's been here. And Eddie just says, there's a reason I left that place. And so that's all Eddie has to say, is he just says, there's a reason I left that place. And so he says, well, okay, what do you think about, your potential match you're going to have here in the King of the Ring? You've got all kinds of possibilities. If you beat Billy Gunn, you could go on and face Chris Jericho or Rhyno, any of these combinations. And Eddie says, I'm only focused on tonight, Eddie says, and I'm here to watch my opponent in the King of the Ring qualifier. I'm here to watch Billy Gunn to see what he looks like. Does he look like the guy that won the King of the Ring a couple years ago, or does he look like the guy that's going to find himself on the wrong side of Eddie Guerrero? Basically just kind of hyping up the idea that Eddie's going to watch Billy because their match is going to take place on Raw. So their qualifier happens on Raw is War on Monday, but Billy's going to be in action tonight, and Eddie says his sole purpose is that he is here to keep his eye on Billy Gunn. So Eddie's here to keep his eye on Billy Gunn, right? That's his focus. 53 for the segment. Well, we should have known that that's not the only reason Eddie is here, because as you can see, we get this one, 59 match, so not as well as I would have expected, but we can tell there's a bad chemistry note here, as it's Matt Hardy defeating Dean Malenko in the King of the Ring qualifier. So Matt has now advanced, and he's going to take on Christian in the quarterfinals based on this victory. But we know, too, that one of the reasons Matt won is because he hits the Twist of Fate following the botched interference from Eddie. So Eddie lies to Michael Cole and says the only reason he's here is to check out Billy Gunn's match coming up against the Good Father. However, Eddie decides to stick his nose in Matt Hardy's business, which we know has kind of been a theme here since the start of our save with the European Championship and all that. But he's unsuccessful as Matt gets the win. And so what will Dean Malenko perhaps think about his former WCW radical mate costing him the match here? That could be something that's interesting tying into this moving forward. But for now, Matt Hardy advances. Eddie unsuccessful. 59 for this one. And so, in case you didn't need more Eddie, more penalized segments from Eddie Guerrero, we have to use Eddie. I mean, we've got to use the guy. It's just, I don't like the fact that we're getting penalized by using him. But after the match, so what happens is, Eddie tries to attack Matt Hardy after the match because he's pissed off because he was unsuccessful in the interference to cost Matt the opportunity to be in the King of the Ring. But, however, Jeff, comes in, and Jeff and Matt are able to run Eddie off. So Eddie is hightailing it out of there. And so Eddie's whole purpose for being here, as he said, was to watch Billy Gunn. Well, I don't know if that's going to happen. This gets a 63 because Billy Gunn is in action next, and there's no Eddie Guerrero because he's been run off by the Hardys. So it is Billy getting the win over the Good Father, as you would expect. 657 for this one. We did storytelling for this match because I just didn't care if it got that high of a rating. Again, this is kind of focused on Billy, who, as you know, we've not seen in this save yet, but he is going to face Eddie, as we mentioned, in the qualifier coming up on Raw is War. So 58 for the segment. Not really much more than that, other than the fact that we kind of, had the Hardys sort of thwart Eddie's plan of coming out and probably also trying to interfere in Billy Gunn's match here. But Eddie gets the win over the Good Father, and that's kind of your story on that. All right. Now, we go backstage, and Kurt Angle is, again, kind of over there. We didn't have, actually, I don't even know if did we have room? Maybe we forgot to put Bischoff in here. But the story is that Angle is, kind of talking to Bischoff. Again, security a little bit higher here, so there's not really that much of, that same threat. Because as we said, Vince has clearly figured out the security breach. So he's not worried. Angle, just oblivious to everything. As we know, it's Kurt Angle. But Angle's talking to Bischoff, and here come Edge and Christian. And so we get a 76 for the segment. And Angle's saying, guys, congratulations. You're going to join me in the King of the Ring. Now, keep in mind that Christian has advanced, and he will face Matt Hardy in the quarterfinals. But Edge is not yet qualified, as Edge still has to face Raven to get into the King of the Ring. And that's when, Edge just says, well, Kurt, I haven't won yet, but I know what you're saying. I know. We're all going to be in the King of the Ring. And Edge just says, but before we talk about that, what about the Dudley Boys? The Dudley Boys on Raw is War talking about how they're going to beat you and Steve Austin for the tag team championships. And Angle's just saying, what are these guys talking about? They're just making fun of the Dudleys and all this other stuff. So Angle's going on and on about the Dudleys, and that's when Edge and Christian are just saying, come on, Kurt, everybody knows if anyone's beating you for those tag team championships, it's probably us. And Kurt just says, wait a second, what are you talking about? What do you mean you're going to beat us for the titles? And Edge is just like, we're just kidding, Kurt. We're the best tag team. That's all we're saying, and all that. So, and Christian just says, Kurt, but let's stop talking about the tag team titles for a second. Let's talk about what's going on with the King of the Ring. I've got a question for you. Christian says, hey, you're an Olympic gold medalist. You're one half of the tag team champions. You've won all this gold. And Christian says, what would you think if you let me win the King of the Ring? And so Edge just looks at Christian like, what are you talking about? Angle says, what are you guys talking about? I am going to win the King of the Ring for a second straight year. I appreciate that you guys are in this tournament, but listen, this is all about competition. If we face each other in the King of the Ring finals, which is a possibility, Kurt says, I have the bracket right here in my pocket. He says, we will just let the best man win, Kurt says, and that best man's going to be me. So these guys are just going back and forth. They're having their fun. And so they're talking, Edge is kind of talking about the different things with, bringing up the Hardys and all this other stuff. Kurt's got to face Jeff and all that. So kind of tying in the history here, but also having a little fun back and forth about how competitive Angle, Edge, and Christian are and talking about the tag team titles, the King of the Ring, and all this. And meanwhile, as they're doing that, these guys walk off. Bischoff, again, is kind of there. And then we just see in the background, who else? None other than Raven, just sort of staring at these guys in the background. So remember, Edge still has to qualify against Raven, but according to Angle, Edge, and Christian, Edge has already advanced in the tournament. So we'll see what that means, perhaps, moving forward. But Raven standing in the background here, watching these guys, and again, watching Angle, Edge, Christian, and Eric Bischoff. 76 for this one. All right, now we get to the women's match, and I just say the women's match because, as you guys know, we got to have one on every show or we get penalized. And so we bring Trish Stratus back here. Remember, she took the beating from Jazz. So did Lita at Judgment Day. But we figured, all right, it's been a couple days. At least she sold the injury on Raw. Now we're going to bring her back for this match against Ivory. And so, we kind of have the setup here. Ivory doing her usual thing, playing the heel stick with right to censor. 61, so actually a pretty decent match here. Lack of psychology. Trish is 72 on the in-ring performance, so we'll take that. Trish gets the win over Ivory, right? That's the story. So Trish has come back before Lita, and she gets the match here. Gave the crowd a breather. That's what we're looking for. But the bigger story is after the match, because here comes Jazz. All right, so Jazz comes out. Trish has made a return. Trish is pissed, and now they're going to brawl. So we got Jazz and Trish brawling. Jazz, once again, able to get the upper hand on Trish. And then what happens? Well, here comes Chyna, our current WWF Women's Champion. Chyna makes her way out, and she makes the save for Trish here. So Chyna comes out, makes the save for Trish. Jazz kind of steps out. We don't yet get that face-to-face between Jazz and Chyna, but nonetheless, Chyna comes out, makes the save, and so we get a 62 here for the segment. What's going to happen with the WWF Women's title? Again, Lita's still out there, has to return. She kind of had her opportunity screwed by Jazz. All kinds of stuff going on right now here as we try to grow our women's division a little bit. But again, I've told you guys, this is going to be a slow burn with the women's division. Right now, we've got to have one match on every show. I'm going to meet that minimum. But other than that, we got to grow the division pretty well. And that's going to happen as we go through this invasion too. As you know, there are some other people we can use from WCW and so forth, kind of help us grow some things. So slow burn women's division, but we'll get there. All right, Chyna, the penalties too to the personal issues. So Chyna and Eddie both giving us that penalty, but come on, that we have to use them based on where we're at right now. All right, now we get to Jonathan Coachman, who's in the back, and he has an update on Chris Jericho. And Coach just says, clearly looking lost as usual, 72. Coach says that Chris Jericho has still not been clear to compete and that his match is coming up next. However, Coachman says, folks, Chris Jericho, he's already on his way to the ring. Like, he just stormed past me and said he doesn't care if he's cleared, he's going to the ring. So Jericho is going out to have this match, and he's just saying, we don't yet think this guy has been cleared to wrestle, but he's going out to have this match anyway. So we are going to get Jericho versus Rhyno. Jericho is beaten up at this point. He's taken a beating from the Big Show, as we said on Raw is War. Took a gore from Rhyno. Jericho clearly not 100%. Remember, too, he was attacked a week ago before Judgment Day, which we later found out was clearly probably done by the Big Show. And so, yet he still was able to go on and beat William Regal. So can Jericho keep this going? I mean, this guy, no way he's at 100%, right? 72 for this one. And we are going to get straight into the match. Rhyno coming out, ready just to feast on Jericho. But yet, Chris Jericho, somehow, the valiant babyface Chris Jericho in a 73 match, pretty good. I would have expected that between these two. Jericho, the quick cradle. So kind of, again, telling the story here that Jericho had no choice, but it just was that 1 3-second spot in this match where Jericho was just able to give that last valiant effort where he could roll up and cradle Rhyno for the quick pin in 10 minutes. So it's basically the whole story again. It was just that Jericho is taking a beating. He's been taking a beating, but Chris Jericho just keeps coming back, right? He keeps finding a way, and will that be the story for Jericho as he now goes into the quarterfinals in the King of the Ring? So Jericho is taking a beating here, but he managed to get the win over Rhyno with a quick cradle, and so Jericho sneaks out of there with a victory. Again, clearly not 100% for him coming out of this, but Jericho beats Rhyno and advances to the quarterfinals. So that's your story here, 73 for this one. So Jericho escapes with the win against Rhyno. All right, now we go backstage again, 90 for this segment, and it is Vince McMahon with Steve Austin. And remember, they've been discussing this business they've had to handle, and now back in there with them are Kurt Angle and Eric Bischoff. And here comes the Big Show. And, you know, they all kind of stand up. They look at Big Show, and we know, of course, too, just like he did earlier, Austin got in Bischoff's face. Austin goes over and gets in the Big Show's face. And Vince just says, Steve, calm down. Remember, facts, not emotions. As Austin, is told by Vince. And that's when Austin, again, kind of looks over at Bischoff. He looks over at Angle. And he just keeps giving Bischoff this look. And Vince just says, Steve, let's calm down. Now, Big Show, you've got a very important match tonight. I appreciate you coming through on your favors that you've owed me, but this is one that I really need you to make sure that you get the job done. William Regal was not able to get the job done. And so Vince just kind of keeps, pushing that line that Regal just has not been able to get it done. I need you to bring that championship back to us tonight by beating Kane so that we can take that title back and have all the gold here with us. And so Vince is just, again, kind of pushing the idea. He brings up the fact that he has banned The Undertaker from the arena, and Vince just says, don't you worry. You won't have to worry about The Undertaker getting in here because I've taken care of the problem, and I will publicly take care of the problem here tonight. You don't have to worry about anybody. You don't have to worry about Booker T, DDP, The Undertaker, anyone else. It's you and Kane, Vince says, and that's the way it's going to be. And that's when you have Austin just kind of sneak in a jab there and say, well, Vince, you want me to go out here and help him the same way you had the Big Show help me? So Austin is continuing. He just can't let it go. And Vince just says, Steve, please, we're going to let the Big Show go out there, and he's going to handle this on his own. And so that's Vince's kind of motto here as he sends the Big Show out for action. And as Big Show walks out, well, again, kind of some of the stuff we've seen before. He walks past Eric Bischoff, gives him an interesting stare, and Show heads to the ring for the Intercontinental Championship match against Kane. 90 for the segment, as we said. And here we go with our main event. Can the Big Show do it? Can he win the Intercontinental title from Kane, who is all alone with no one else there? And in a not very good match here, not a good main event on SmackDown. 64 for this one. The crowd was hot, which we expected. However, it is Kane defeating the Big Show in 7:27 as Kane hits the choke slam on Show. And so the whole match design here, yes, was chaos. Like that was it. We have to have one of those for every single show where you've got the note where I think it's either, Mayhem, Wild Brawl, one of those story, notes you have to pick. So we did that one. And yeah, that was kind of the story here. So Kane, though, as we said, the bigger story is that Kane wins. And that is, again, not ideal, right? As Kane gets to win over the Big Show. So Kane gets the win over Show. And that's kind of your setup here is that, the Big Show has lost to Kane. Kane was able to get the best of him and score the victory. However, remember what Vince McMahon said about The Undertaker and how he was banned from the arena. He said it multiple times. Vince had figured out the security situation and that The Undertaker, there was no chance he was going to get in. Well, The Undertaker comes out after the match, and here comes Taker through the crowd. He has been let into the building. How did he get in? Maybe Vince has not solved his problem just yet. Taker comes in, and so Taker comes out, and now it's Taker and Kane taking it to Big Show. And so they're fighting through the crowd. Remember, Vince specifically said that he, Austin, and Angle, they're all staying back there. No one's helping Big Show. Well, they're probably seeing this now because that is kind of the story. Taker, Kane, and Big Show are now fighting through the arena, and we see Vince, Kurt Angle, Steve Austin, and Eric Bischoff make their way out into the ramp as these three exit onto basically the concourse, right? They fought up through the crowd. They've exited through the concourse, so now they're out of there. But Vince is looking up, and he's seeing this, like these guys are gone. And Vince just said, that's it. We see Vince saying, that's it. Everybody get to the ring right now. And so he's, kind of directing orders here. He wants Austin, Angle, and Bischoff all in the ring. So Vince tells them they got to get to the ring right now. 83 for this one. And Vince just says, that's it. Damn it. We are doing this now. We're not waiting. Because clearly something, or should I say someone, is trying to jeopardize the WWF. Someone is trying to make sure that WCW and The Undertaker and Kane all get the best of me, Steve Austin, Kurt Angle. And Vince says, unfortunately for that someone, I know exactly who it is. And Vince says, I had the conversation. I was given a name, and I know who's in charge of not just letting The Undertaker, Kane, and Chris Jericho into the building over a week ago, not just allowing Booker T and DDP to get into the building at Judgment Day, but now I know who was in charge of letting The Undertaker into the building just moments ago, because it's the same person who's done it every single time, and this person thought, Vince said, that I could trust them. And Vince says, but I've learned from Stone Cold Steve Austin a very simple motto. Don't trust anybody. And Vince says, Steve, a couple weeks ago, there was something you wanted to do worse than anything in the world. Steve, now's the time. 83 for the segment. And that is when Stone Cold Steve Austin goes over and hits the stunner on Eric Bischoff. Austin with the stunner to Bischoff, and Kurt Angle is grabbing his head going, Steve, what are you doing? Angle says, Steve, calm down. Why did you just do that? And Austin not just hits the stunner on Bischoff, he gets on top of Bischoff, and it's the trademark Steve Austin mounted punches, where Austin is just hauling off on Eric Bischoff. All this aggression, perhaps, that Steve Austin has had over the years, all this anger is coming out on Eric Bischoff, and he has unloaded on the former WCW president here, Eric Bischoff, and Angle is losing his mind. He's telling Vince to stop Austin and all of this other stuff. And finally, after just an absolute beating here, Austin gets up, 91 as we said, and that is when Vince McMahon walks over, and the stoic Vince, earlier talking about facts over emotions, well, that goes out the window here, because Vince absolutely loses it, and he says, it was you, Eric. You were the person all along that's been pulling the strings, and when Booker T and DDP showed up at Judgment Day, you thought that you could actually get away with it. But I now know you were the person, you were the name that allowed all this to happen. I tried to bring you in because I knew that it would be a mutual partnership between you and I to crush WCW once and for all, and to crush my son, Shane McMahon. But, again, it's all about trust, and maybe I should have learned from Steve not to trust anybody. And so Vince says, if you're going to go back to your little friends at WCW, you tell them, if they thought that we weren't on the same page, well, now you've pissed off Stone Cold Steve Austin, and you've pissed off Vince McMahon, and we are going to do whatever it takes to finish WCW once and for all. So, Vince McMahon has revealed that the name he was given was Eric Bischoff. Bischoff, the person pulling the strings with the security breaches and all that. And again, there were people telling Vince he should have known not to trust, but he did, and now we see how it's unfolded. 92, as we finish the show here. 78 for the show. Again, the main event was a big part of the, I would say, the lowering of the rating here. Could have done much better, but all right, 78, see what we get to before we wrap up. So our financial report here, making a lot of money. You guys know that. Only made $141,000 on this one, or $142,000. So our post-show finance is still sitting pretty well here, I would say. Popularity recap, pretty much, the same everywhere. Not a huge difference there. No media scrum. All right, see what else to get to before we wrap up. Okay, so one thing we forgot to mention was that Austin did invent a catchphrase. That was something that was in that main event segment. So who knows what it was? I mean, Vince was using his catchphrase of DTA, but maybe Austin came up with something else while he was beating the hell out of Bischoff. So you guys in the comments can weigh in on what you think Steve Austin's catchphrase is. He had to have said it as he was beating up Bischoff. That's what we're going to go with. So what do you think he said as he was taking out Eric Bischoff on that one? All right, so SmackDown, positive show. Not striking gold here, but that's okay. Sunday Night Heat was on, so a lukewarm show. Doesn't seem to have gone down particularly well. Again, I am not really in Sunday Night Heat mode right now. I do book the shows, but I do it about as fast as I can. So I don't even know if there's anything on this show that was notable. Too Cool defeated X Factor in the main event. Everything else is just kind of there, as you can tell. So I, again, kind of speed through Sunday Night Heat right now. Maybe that'll change as we kind of do something in the future, but right now I'm just not there on it. So, all right, that was that. Our male, Conan. So I guess we had Conan on our short list. So Noah, Pro Wrestling Noah, has offered a touring contract to Conan. So not really anything there. At least we didn't have anything from Angle. Hating on anyone, Steve Blackman, anyone like that. So there you have it. All right, guys, that was SmackDown. The big reveal, Eric Bischoff, the name that Vince was given for the big security breach. What does that mean now? And what else could be in store here as things escalate in the war between the WWF and WCW? We'll find out, perhaps moving forward as we get ready to enter June. And I say that because that means we have to get to our State of the WWF for June before we get to the next edition of Raw. So that will be the next episode. If you're new to the channel, you know that in all the series, we kind of do a monthly recap where we go in, we look at all the kind of fun stuff with, popularity ratings, who has grown their popularity. We look at, prestige of titles and storyline heat and all that kind of stuff. So it's really a number-based thing, and we'll look at that in sort of a quicker episode before we get to Raw is War. So appreciate you guys watching as always. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button as well. Let me know what you thought about the big reveal of Eric Bischoff, and what else do you think is on the horizon here as we head towards the King of the Ring coming up in June. Again, I said this will kind of be something where it's 2 shows a week. Not every show is always going to give you a huge speeding development in terms of like getting from point A to point B very fast, but there will be some big kind of moments, and this was one of those, and there will be many more to come here as we head towards King of the Ring. There will still be some pretty big developments before we get to King of the Ring and beyond. So that's where we stand right now, but appreciate you guys watching as always, and on the next episode of our WWF Invasion 2001 save, it will be our State of the WWF for June 2001.